The warship Scarthan Dominion floated in the vast darkness of space, its massive hull gleaming under the distant light of a dying star. It was a ship of nightmares, feared across the galaxy. But it was not just its weapons or size that made it terrifying. It was the trophies it carried. Strapped to the outer hull, in a transparent energy cage, was a lone prisoner. Her name was Vera, and she was the last of her kind. Her people, the Valteri, had once thrived on a distant world, a peaceful race known for their knowledge and beauty. But the Xilari Imperium, an empire of warlords, had wiped them out, burning their cities, crushing their defenses, and enslaving the survivors. Now Vera was displayed as a living trophy. A warning. A message to the galaxy. This is what happens to those who resist. Her silver eyes, once full of life, stared into the endless void. The cold of space could not reach her through the energy barrier, but she still felt it in her heart. Days, weeks, months, she had lost track of time. The Xilari warriors aboard the ship often jeered at her, laughing at her suffering. But she refused to break. Even in silence, she defied them. Far below, inside a busy trade station, a human named Daniel Holt watched. Daniel was no hero. He wasn't a soldier, nor a freedom fighter. He was a scavenger, a trader of stolen goods, and sometimes, when money was tight, a mercenary. He had seen many terrible things in his life, but this was different. Standing near a docking bay, he looked up at the Xilari warship, his sharp brown eyes narrowing. He had come here to strike a deal with some shady buyers, but now his focus was elsewhere. He could see her, the alien woman, trapped like an animal, displayed like a trophy. Even from this distance, he saw her pain, her exhaustion, but also something else. Defiance. Most prisoners would have given up by now. Most would have accepted their fate, but not her. Daniel clenched his fists. He had no reason to care. The galaxy was cruel. Slavery, war, suffering. These things happened every day. One man could not change that. And yet, he turned to his contact, a greasy merchant named Boro, who was trying to sell him illegal weapons. That ship, Daniel said, interrupting the merchant's sales pitch. The one with the trophies. What do you know about it? Boro chuckled. Ah, the Scarthan Dominion belongs to Commander Voktal, a real monster. He takes trophies from every world he conquers. You don't want trouble with him. Daniel's stomach twisted. Voktal. He had heard that name before. A ruthless warlord, known for his cruelty. Boro continued, lowering his voice. That one up there. The Valteri woman. She's the last of her race. The Xilari wiped them out. Now they keep her as a prize. He shook his head. No use worrying about it. She's dead either way. Daniel said nothing. He knew the smart thing to do. Walk away. Forget what he saw. But something in him refused. Maybe it was the way she still held herself upright, refusing to show weakness. Maybe it was the memory of his own past, of when he had been powerless, just like her. Or maybe, just maybe, he was sick of watching monsters win. He exhaled sharply. Who owns that ship? Boro frowned. I told you, Voktal. Why? Because, Daniel said, already forming a plan. I'm going to steal her. Boro's eyes widened, then he burst into laughter. You? Against the Xilari? You're insane. Daniel smirked. Yeah, maybe. But he was already walking away, heading toward his ship. The plan was forming in his mind. It was insane. It was impossible. But he was going to do it anyway. Daniel Holt sat inside his small, battered ship, the star shadow staring at the holoscreen in front of him. The glowing display showed information about the Scarthan Dominion, the Xilari warship where Vera was being held. The more he read, the more impossible this plan seemed. The Scarthan Dominion was a fortress in space, armed with heavy cannons, fighter squadrons, and a full battalion of Xilari soldiers. It was one of the most dangerous warships in the Imperium's fleet. Breaking into it was madness. But Daniel had already made his choice. He leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his short, messy hair. He needed a plan, one that didn't end with him being vaporized by the ship's defenses. Gathering information. First, he needed to know more. He reached out to an old contact, Mara, a black market dealer who had worked with the HFY before. Her voice crackled over the communicator. "Daniel, if you're calling me, that means you need something dangerous. I need access codes to HFY warship." There was a long silence. Then Mara laughed. "You're joking, right?" "I wish I was." Mara sighed. "Which ship?" "The Scarthan Dominion." Another silence. Then, "Daniel, do you have a death wish?" "Not today." Mara swore under her breath. "Listen, that ship belongs to Commander Vogtel. He's one of the worst of them. If you try anything, you won't just die. You'll die screaming." Daniel ignored the warning. "Can you get me the codes or not?" Mara hesitated, then said, "It'll cost you." "I'll pay." "You don't even know how much." "I don't care." Mara sighed again. "Fine. Give me a few hours." The line went dead. Daniel exhaled slowly. That was step one. Now he needed a way inside. Infiltration plan. Storming the ship with weapons was suicide. The HFY were bigger, stronger, and had better technology. Instead, he would infiltrate the warship by posing as a black market arms dealer. The HFY were always looking for new weapons, and Daniel had experience smuggling illegal tech. If he could get on board under the pretense of selling high-value weapons, he might have a chance to disable the security systems from the inside. His plan had 3 steps. Get the access codes. Without them, he wouldn't even make it past the docking bay. Plant explosives in key areas. This would create a distraction and cripple the ship's ability to respond. Find Vera and escape before the HFY realize what's happening. Simple in theory. In reality, nearly impossible. But impossible had never stopped him before. A risky deal. Hours later, Mara sent him the codes. The price: half of his entire savings. Daniel winced but transferred the credits without argument. Money wouldn't matter if he was dead. He then contacted a weapons supplier on the station and purchased a crate of prototype plasma rifles. The HFY wouldn't resist inspecting new weapons, which would give him an excuse to board the ship. Now, all that was left was to take the first step. Boarding the warship, the Star Shadow approached the Scarthan Dominion carefully. The warship loomed ahead, its dark metal hull covered in scars from past battles. Daniel activated his communicator, speaking in a calm, confident voice. "This is Trader Ronan Vale requesting permission to dock. I have weapons for Commander Vogtel." A HFY officer responded. "Transmit your authorization codes." Daniel did, his heart pounding. If Mara had sold him out, he would be blasted to dust in seconds. A tense pause. Then the officer replied, "Codes accepted. Proceed to docking bay 4." Daniel released the breath he had been holding. Step 1 was complete. The Star Shadow glided into the docking bay, metal clamps securing it in place. The bay doors sealed shut behind him, trapping him inside the warship. Armed Scifi soldiers stood in formation as he stepped out, trying to look casual. A massive Scifi officer approached, Captain Droken, second in command under Vogtel. His yellow eyes gleamed with suspicion. "You are late, human," Droken growled. Daniel shrugged. "Good weapons take time." Droken snorted. "Follow me." Inside the beast, Daniel walked through the ship, keeping his face neutral while his mind raced. He had studied the layout beforehand. If he was right, Vera's energy cage should be held near the upper levels, exposed to space. They reached a secure storage area. Droken motioned to the crate. "Open it." Daniel did, revealing the plasma rifles inside. Droken picked one up, inspecting it. Emph. Acceptable. Now came the tricky part. Daniel needed to stall while planting his explosives. He started talking. "These rifles are top of the line. Faster recharge, higher damage. But you need the right power cores. As he spoke, his left hand moved subtly, attaching a small explosive to the crate's underside. If the auxiliary scanned for weapons, they would only find the obvious ones. No one would check underneath. Droken smirked. Your reputation is not exaggerated, human. Daniel smiled. Glad to hear it. Now, he just needed to find Vera, the living trophy. As the deal concluded, Daniel subtly glanced at a nearby holoscreen displaying security feeds. And then, he saw her. Vera. She was exactly where he expected, strapped to the ship's outer hull in a glowing energy cage. Even from the small image, Daniel could see the exhaustion in her silver eyes. But she was still alive. His fists clenched. He had come this far. He wouldn't fail now. Droken turned to him. The deal is done. You may leave. Daniel forced a casual nod. Of course. I'll be in touch if I get more weapons. He turned and walked toward his ship, but his real mission was only just beginning. Tonight, he would return, and he would take Vera back. The cold metal corridors of the Scarthan Dominion hummed with the sound of distant engines. The warship was massive, a floating fortress in space, patrolled by ruthless Silari soldiers. It was built to be impenetrable. But tonight, someone was going to break the rules. Daniel Holt crouched behind a stack of supply crates in a dimly lit corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. He had returned after his fake weapons deal, sneaking back onto the ship through a service hatch he had unlocked earlier. He knew he had little time before someone noticed his presence. The mission was clear: get to Vera, disable her energy cage, and escape before the entire warship turned against him. Easier said than done. A silent approach. Daniel moved quickly but carefully, his boots barely making a sound against the metal floor. He kept his blaster ready, but hoped he wouldn't have to use it yet. The less noise he made, the longer he could stay unnoticed. He had already planted explosives in key areas earlier when he was posing as a weapons dealer. Those would serve as his distraction when the time came. Now he just had to get to Vera. Using a stolen security card, he accessed the maintenance tunnels running through the ship's walls. These tunnels were narrow and dark, filled with humming power cables and exposed pipes. It was risky, but it allowed him to move unseen. A minute later, he reached a small access panel and peered through the vent. His breath caught. The last of her kind. Vera was still there. She was strapped inside a transparent energy cage on the warship's outer hull, separated from open space only by a powerful force field. The glow of distant stars reflected in her silver eyes. Even now, she held her head high. She looked exhausted, weak, but not broken. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had seen enough cruelty in his life. He had looked away before, but this time, he was going to change something. He pulled a small device from his belt, a signal jammer. If he could disrupt the ship's security for just a few minutes, he could disable the cage before alarms were raised. Breaking the cage. Slipping out of the vent, Daniel landed softly on the metal platform overlooking the cage. He moved quickly, attaching the jammer to a nearby control panel. The moment he activated it, the security feeds would freeze for a short time. His only window of opportunity. He pressed the button. The jammer buzzed to life, sending out a silent pulse. The lights on the control panel flickered. Daniel hurried to the energy cage's controls, inputting an override command. Vera's eyes snapped to him. For a moment, she just stared. Then she whispered, "You." Daniel smirked. "Yeah, me." She didn't say anything else, but her eyes widened slightly as the energy field around her flickered and then disappeared. She collapsed forward, her knees hitting the cold metal floor. Daniel moved fast, catching her before she could fall completely. Her body was too light, weakened from months of captivity, but she still had the strength to push against him slightly, as if unwilling to show weakness. "We need to go," Daniel said, glancing around. "Now." Vera hesitated. Why? Her voice was rough from lack of use. Daniel frowned. What? Why are you helping me? She asked. What do you gain? Daniel looked her in the eyes. Because you don't belong in a cage. For a second, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. The alarm sounds. Just as Daniel helped Vera to her feet, everything went wrong. The security panel behind them buzzed, sparks flying from the system. The energy cage was down, but the jammer had triggered a backup alert. Sirens blared across the warship. ANTRUDERDT. Daniel swore under his breath. Time to run. Vera, still weak but determined, nodded. Daniel grabbed a blaster from his belt and pulled Vera with him. The nearest escape route was through the maintenance tunnels, but it wouldn't be long before the auxiliary realized where they were. And then they would come. Fire and fury. Daniel pulled Vera through the corridors as red warning lights flashed around them. Heavy boots pounded against the metal floors. The auxiliary guards were coming. A voice echoed over the ship's comm system. Commander Vogtel. Who dares steal my trophy? The voice was deep, filled with anger. You will suffer for this. Daniel didn't bother answering. Instead, he turned a corner and came face to face with 3 auxiliary soldiers. Their glowing yellow eyes widened in surprise. Daniel shot first. His blaster sent out a blue streak of energy, hitting the first soldier square in the chest. The auxiliary dropped. The second raised his rifle, but Vera moved. Even weak, she was fast. She grabbed the soldier's arm, twisting it hard, making him lose his grip. Then, using her remaining strength, she kicked him backward. Daniel took out the last one with a clean headshot. Vera stumbled slightly, breathing heavily. Daniel grabbed her hand. No time to stop, he said. Come on. They ran. The great escape. They reached the lower hangar, where Daniel had hidden a small escape pod earlier. The door was locked. He quickly hacked the control panel, sweat beading on his forehead as the sounds of approaching soldiers grew louder. Hurry, Vera said, gripping the side of the pod for balance. The door slid open just as more guards burst into the hangar. Daniel shoved Vera inside and jumped in after her. A blaster shot whizzed past his head as he slammed the controls. The pod launched, shooting out into open space. The Scarthan Dominion shrank behind them, its massive shape glowing under the light of distant stars. But they weren't safe yet. Daniel checked the scanner. Enemy ships were already moving. Vera, breathing heavily beside him, looked at him. What now? She asked. Daniel smirked. Now. We run. He grabbed the flight controls and punched the thrusters. The escape pod shot forward, vanishing into the blackness of space. They were free. For now. But Daniel knew one thing for certain. Commander Vogtel wouldn't stop hunting them. The escape pod shook violently as it sped away from the Scarthan Dominion. Daniel gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. Outside the small viewport, distant stars streaked past as they plunged deeper into space. Vera sat beside him, breathing hard. She was free, but she wasn't safe yet. Daniel checked the scanners. 3 auxiliary ships were in pursuit. His jaw tightened. Of course, they wouldn't let them go so easily. The warlord, Commander Vogtel, had been humiliated, and Daniel knew exactly what kind of person Vogtel was. One who never forgave, never forgot. This thing isn't fast enough, Daniel muttered, tapping the pod's old navigation system. We won't outrun them like this. Vera looked at the screen, her silver eyes narrowing. Then what do we do? Daniel hesitated. There was only one option. It was reckless. It was insane. We jump. Vera frowned. Jump. Daniel pointed at the flashing coordinates on the screen. There's an asteroid field nearby. If we time it right, we can lose them inside. Vera glanced at the screen, then at him. That's madness. Yeah, Daniel said with a grin. But it's our only shot. A desperate gamble. Daniel punched the coordinates into the pod's system. The small craft veered sharply, heading straight toward the asteroid field. Behind them, the auxiliary ships closed in, their weapons charged, glowing with deadly energy. Then, boom! The escape pod jerked violently as an enemy shot grazed its side. Sparks flew from the controls. "We're hit," Vera shouted. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Hold on." The asteroid field came into view, a chaotic maze of spinning rocks, some as large as cities, others no bigger than the pod itself. Daniel's hands flew over the controls, weaving the ship between the moving debris. Behind them, the auxiliary ships hesitated. They weren't built for this kind of flying. Their warships were fast, powerful, but not maneuverable. "Come on," Daniel muttered, weaving between two large asteroids. The auxiliary ships followed, but one miscalculated. A massive chunk of rock slammed into it, sending it spinning out of control. One down. The other two kept chasing. Close call. Daniel saw a narrow gap between two huge asteroids. It was just big enough for their pod. But if he miscalculated by even a fraction, they'd be crushed. "Hold your breath," Daniel said. Vera tensed beside him. Daniel pushed the thrusters to full power. The pod shot forward. The walls of the asteroids rushed toward them. Closer, closer. Whoosh! The pod squeezed through, just as the two auxiliary ships fired their weapons. Their shots hit the asteroids instead, causing a massive explosion of rock and dust. For a moment, everything was silent. Daniel checked the scanner. The auxiliary ships were gone. He exhaled, leaning back in his seat. That was fun. Vera shot him a look. "You call that fun?" He grinned. "You're alive, aren't you?" She shook her head but didn't argue. A temporary refuge. With the auxiliary ships gone, Daniel guided the damaged pod toward the nearest neutral station, an old mining outpost on the edge of civilized space. The station was small, rusted and barely operational, but it was a place to hide. They docked in one of the old maintenance bays. As the pod's hatch hissed open, Daniel stepped out, stretching his stiff muscles. Vera followed, her movements slow. She was still weak from captivity. "We need supplies," Daniel said. "Food, medical gear, and a real ship." Vera nodded, glancing around warily. "This place, is it safe?" Daniel chuckled. "No place is safe, but this one's dangerous in the right way." The station was filled with smugglers, mercenaries, and traders, people who didn't ask questions. But even here, he had to be careful, because sooner or later, Voktal would come looking, a shadow in the dark. Inside the station, Daniel led Vera to a quiet corner of the marketplace. He was about to speak when a warning flashed across a nearby holoscreen. Daniel's stomach dropped. A bounty notice. His face appeared on the screen, along with a massive reward, dead or alive. And beside him, Vera's face. Her price was even higher. She saw it too. "That's a lot." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Yeah, that's a problem." Vera gave him a sideways glance. "Still think this was a good idea?" Daniel smirked. Oh, it was a terrible idea. He looked around. Already, a few hunters in the crowd were staring at them. Trouble was coming. Fast. Daniel cracked his knuckles. "Guess we're fighting our way out." Vera sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." Then, the first bounty hunter drew his weapon. And the fight began. The stolen cargo ship drifted through the darkness of space, its engines humming softly. Daniel sat in the pilot's seat, his wounded shoulder aching. He had wrapped a bandage around it, but the pain was still there, a reminder of how close they had come to death. Vera sat beside him, silent and thoughtful. For the first time since they had escaped the Scarthan Dominion, she didn't look like someone running for her life. She looked like someone planning a fight. Daniel glanced at her. "You really want to go after Voktal?" Vera nodded. He won't stop hunting us. If we run, we'll always be running. Daniel leaned back, thinking. She was right. They needed to take the fight to him. But taking on a warlord wasn't easy. We need a plan, he said. A real one. Vera smirked. Good thing I have one. A dangerous proposal. Vera stood up and walked to the ship's navigation console. She tapped a few buttons, and a holographic map of the sector appeared. She zoomed in on a point near the edge of Silari-controlled space. This, she said, pointing, is where we strike. Daniel frowned. What's there? A supply convoy, Vera explained. Every month, Voktal's forces transport high-grade fuel and weapons from a mining colony to his war fleet. It's heavily guarded but not impossible to hit. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You want to rob a warlord? Vera nodded. Steal his weapons, hurt his supply lines, and send a message. He's not untouchable. Daniel grinned. I like it. Finding help. But they couldn't do it alone. A cargo ship wasn't enough to take on an armed convoy. They needed reinforcements. Daniel set a course for Blackreach, a lawless station known for attracting mercenaries, smugglers, and bounty hunters. If there was any place to hire a crew, it was there. The journey took several hours. When they finally arrived, Blackreach loomed before them, a massive rusting structure floating in deep space, its lights flickering like dying stars. Daniel docked the ship, and they stepped into the station. The air smelled of oil, metal, and trouble. They didn't have to look far to find the kind of people they needed. In a dimly lit bar filled with pirates and mercenaries, they found two candidates. Rek, a gruff human ex-soldier known for his skills with explosives, and Taro, a blue-skinned alien pilot with quick reflexes and even quicker hands. Daniel explained the plan. Rek smirked. Hitting auxiliary supply convoy. Sounds suicidal. Daniel shrugged. Pays well. Taro leaned forward. How well? Daniel tapped a small data drive on the table. Enough to buy your own ship. Rek and Taro exchanged glances. Then they nodded. They had a crew. Now, all they needed was a battle plan. Preparing for war. Back on the ship, Vera pulled up the convoy's expected route and defenses. The transport would be escorted by 3 auxiliary gunships, fast and heavily armed. We can't win in a straight fight, she admitted. But we don't have to. Daniel grinned. We just have to be smarter. The plan. Taro would fly their ship into position near a dense asteroid belt, using the rocks as cover. Rek would plant a remote-controlled EMP mine along the convoy's route, disabling their shields for a short time. When the convoy's defenses were down, Daniel and Vera would board the transport, take control, and escape before reinforcements arrived. Simple, Daniel said. Dangerous, Rek added. Profitable. Taro finished. The ambush. They reached the convoy's path just in time. The auxiliary ships appeared on the scanner, 3 escort gunships protecting a massive fuel and weapons transport. Taro maneuvered their ship behind a large asteroid, hiding from the convoy sensors. Rek activated the EMP mine. The moment the convoy passed over it, boom! A surge of energy rippled through the area. The escort ships flickered, their shields collapsing. Now, Vera shouted. Taro gunned the engines, bringing their ship in close to the transport. Daniel and Vera jumped out, landing on the transport's exterior hull. The auxiliary crew inside were panicked. Their systems were still rebooting. Daniel cut through a hatch, and they dropped inside. Taking the ship, the auxiliary inside weren't going down without a fight. Blaster fire erupted as Daniel and Vera moved through the narrow halls. Vera moved like a shadow, striking fast and hard. Daniel covered her, taking out enemies with precise shots. They'd reached the control room, where the captain, a tall auxiliary with deep scars, stood waiting. You dare steal from Voktal, he snarled. Vera stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing. You stole my people. Now, I take from you. The auxiliary lunged at her, but Vera was faster. She dodged his attack and slammed a fist into his chest, knocking him back. Daniel fired his blaster, and the captain collapsed. The ship was theirs. The escape. Outside, the escort ships recovered from the EMP blast. They're coming back online. Tero's voice crackled over the comm. Daniel took the controls, hacking the ship's autopilot. The transport's weapons turned on its own escorts, firing before they could react. 2 of the gunships exploded in flames. The third ship hesitated, then turned and fled. Tero cheered over the comm. That's how you do it. Vera leaned back, exhaling. We won. Daniel smirked. And Voktal just lost a whole lot of weapons. A message to Voktal. They took the transport to a hidden smuggler base, where they sold half the stolen cargo and used the rest to upgrade their own ship. Then, Daniel sent a message directly to Voktal's command center. A simple transmission. Vera appeared on the screen, holding one of Voktal's stolen weapons. You put a price on our heads, she said. But we're still here. And now we're coming for you. She shut off the transmission. Daniel grinned. Now he knows we're not just running. Vera's eyes glowed. Now he knows we're a threat. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Now they were hunting him. The stolen warship hovered in the darkness of space, hidden within a dense asteroid field. Inside, Daniel and his crew prepared for the next phase of their battle against Voktal. They had stolen his weapons, destroyed his convoy, and sent a message directly to him. Now, the warlord would retaliate, and they were ready. A storm approaching. Vera stood near the holotable, scanning the incoming data. Voktal won't let this go, she said. He'll come after us. Daniel smirked. Good. Saves us the trouble of finding him. Rek, their explosives expert, grunted. I'd rather not be in the middle of a war. Tero, their ace pilot, leaned back in his chair. Too late for that. We poked the beast. Now we see how angry it gets. A beeping sound interrupted them. Tero checked the radar. His expression darkened. Looks like we don't have to wait long. Incoming ships. Big ones. Daniel turned to Vera. Is it Voktal? She nodded. It's him. The fleet arrives. Outside, 3 Scarthan warships emerged from hyperspace, their massive hulls glowing under the distant sun. Each one was armed with heavy plasma cannons, fighter squadrons, and elite troops. And at the center of it all, on the largest ship, was Voktal himself. Daniel clenched his jaw. He brought his whole army. Vera's eyes burned with determination. Then we take them down. The trap. Daniel and his team had known Voktal would come. So they had set a trap. Rek had placed explosive charges on several asteroids, hidden from enemy scanners. If timed right, they could turn the asteroid field into a death trap. Vera gave the signal. Rek pressed the detonator. Boom! A chain of explosions erupted through the asteroid field, sending massive chunks of rock flying in every direction. One of Voktal's warships was hit hard, its shields flickering before it exploded in a ball of fire. The second warship tried to dodge, but a massive asteroid slammed into its side, tearing through its hull. The ship lost control, drifting aimlessly into space. Only Voktal's flagship remained. Aboard the enemy ship, Daniel, Vera, Rek, and Tero launched toward the flagship in their stolen warship. They dodged incoming fire, their shields barely holding. Then, at the last moment, they crashed their ship into Voktal's docking bay, jumping out before it exploded. Inside, enemy soldiers were waiting. Blaster fire erupted. Daniel and Vera moved fast, taking cover and returning fire. Rek threw a grenade, clearing a path. Tero hacked a control panel, shutting down security turrets before they could activate. They pushed forward, deeper into the ship. Voktal was waiting for them. The final confrontation. At the center of the ship, in the command chamber, Voktal stood tall. His dark armor gleamed under the red emergency lights. He looked at Vera with a cold smile. "You should have stayed dead." Vera stepped forward. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Voktal lunged, drawing a massive energy blade. Vera dodged, striking back with swift precision. Daniel fired his blaster, but Voktal blocked the shots with his blade. He was fast, too fast. Vera and Voktal clashed, their fight shaking the room. Sparks flew as their weapons met. Daniel, Rek, and Taro took on the remaining guards, fighting to keep Vera's path clear. The battle rage. Then, finally, Vera saw her opening. With one final powerful strike, she drove her weapon through Voktal's chest. The warlord staggered, his eyes wide with shock. "You will never win," he whispered. Then he fell. The escape. Alarms blared. The ship was set to self-destruct. Daniel grabbed Vera's hand. "We have to go. Now." The team rushed back to the hangar, stealing a fighter ship just in time. Behind them, Voktal's flagship exploded in a massive fireball, lighting up space. They had won. A new beginning. Back on their base, Daniel and his team watched the news reports. Voktal was dead. His forces were in chaos. The Scarthan Dominion had lost its most feared leader. Vera turned to Daniel. "What now?" Daniel smirked. "Now, we decide what comes next." For the first time in a long time, they weren't running. They were free. The wreckage of Voktal's flagship drifted in space, its burning remains scattering across the void. The warlord was gone. His Scarthan Dominion was falling apart. But Daniel and his crew knew their fight wasn't over yet. The price of victory. On their stolen fighter ship, Daniel sat at the controls, his hand still gripping the flight stick tightly. The battle was over, but his mind was racing. Behind him, Vera sat quietly, her silver eyes staring at the stars. She had finally taken revenge on the one who had enslaved her people. But the weight of it all still hung in the air. Rek, their demolitions expert, leaned back against the wall, letting out a tired breath. "So, we actually did it." Taro, their pilot, let out a chuckle. "Yeah, and now half the galaxy probably wants to kill us." Daniel smirked. Wouldn't be the first time. But he knew Taro was right. Voktal might be dead, but his followers were still out there. The Dominion had ruled through fear and power, and even without their leader, they wouldn't just vanish overnight. The question now was, what came next? A dangerous invitation. As they drifted toward their secret hideout, a sudden beeping sound came from the ship's long-range communication system. Daniel frowned. "We're getting an incoming transmission." Vera stood up, her expression serious. "From who?" Daniel checked the signal. His eyes widened. "It's from the Xelari Republic." The Xelari Republic had been fighting against the Scarthan Dominion for years, trying to free planets from their control. But they had never been able to fully defeat Voktal. And now, they wanted to talk. Daniel opened the transmission. A holographic image appeared. A Xelari general with dark skin and glowing golden eyes. "You are Daniel Holt, correct?" the general said. Daniel crossed his arms. "That depends. Who's asking?" The general smiled. "My name is General Carvos of the Xelari Republic. I believe you and your crew just did the entire galaxy a favor." Vera stepped forward. "We didn't do it for favors." Carvos nodded. "I understand. But now that Voktal is gone, the Dominion is vulnerable. His warlords will fight for control, and the chaos could last for years. We want to end it, for good." Daniel's eyebrows raised. "You want our help?" The general's expression was serious. "You've already done what our fleets couldn't. The people are rising up. They see you as the ones who ended Voktal's rule. If you fight with us, we can destroy the Dominion forever." There was silence. The offer was tempting. Daniel looked at his crew. Rek was already grinning, as if ready for another fight. Taro raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "Vera, however, was deep in thought. After a moment, she spoke. What happens after the Dominion falls? Carvos hesitated. We rebuild. We bring peace. Vera's eyes narrowed. That's what every leader says, until they take power for themselves. Carvos sighed. I won't lie to you. Power is dangerous. But with people like you standing beside us, we can make sure history doesn't repeat itself. Daniel exhaled. It was a huge risk. But if they didn't act, the Dominion's warlords would take control, and the suffering would continue. He glanced at Vera. What do you think? She hesitated, then nodded. We finish what we started. Daniel turned back to Carvos. All right, General. We're in. The final battle. The next few weeks were a blur. Daniel and his team helped the Xilari Republic unite rebels, pirates, and freedom fighters against the Dominion's remaining forces. The final battle took place above the Dominion's last stronghold, Corthus Prime, a fortress planet surrounded by orbital cannons and warships. But Daniel and his team had a plan. While the Republic fleet distracted the enemy, Taro piloted their ship straight into the heart of the Dominion's main command station. Inside, Daniel, Vera, Rek, and a small strike team fought their way through enemy soldiers, disabling shields and taking out key defenses. In the end, the Republic overwhelmed the Dominion, and the final strongholds fell. The war was over. The Scarthan Dominion was no more. A new future. As the Republic forces celebrated, Daniel and his crew stood on the bridge of their ship, watching the planet below. Taro leaned back. So, we're heroes now. Rek chuckled. Not sure I like the sound of that. Vera crossed her arms. Heroes or not, we did the right thing. Daniel nodded. He had never been one for politics or grand speeches, but he knew one thing. They had changed the galaxy. Now, they had a choice. They could stay and help rebuild, or they could disappear into the stars and find new adventures. Daniel smirked. What do you say? One last job. Vera smiled. Always. The ship's engines roared to life. And just like that, they'd vanished into the stars once more.